A cry rises from the hill country, and it does not sound like power. It sounds like a woman's breath catching in her throat. Shiloh sits quiet, the tabernacle linen glowing in lamplight, and a nation slides sideways while no one admits it. Priests siphon meat before the fat burns. Bribes slip under the table. Families bring offerings, and the ministers at God's tent teach them how to sin. In that air, Hannah makes a vow that cuts straight through the rot. No bargaining for status. No spiritual theater. She hands over the future before she even cradles it, telling heaven that if a son comes, he will belong to the Lord all his days. No razor, no half measures. The word lands like a seed in hard soil. A child arrives. Samuel. The boy is weaned and carried back to Shiloh with an animal for sacrifice and a mother's heart that has learned surrender. Each year she returns with a new little robe stitched by hand, measured to a growing frame. The rhythm is almost ordinary. The boy ministers in a linen ephod not because power circles chose him, but because a vow opened a channel in an age without them. Meanwhile, the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, take women at the entrance of the tent and reach their forks into offerings with a greed that makes the ancients shudder. An unnamed man of God walks into that corruption and states a verdict. The house of Eli will fall. No old age. A sign will come. 2 sons will die on a single day. The words hang in the air like smoke that does not disperse. Night in Shiloh breathes thin. The lamp of God still burns, but its oil runs low. A voice calls the sleeping boy by name. He thinks it is Eli, because that is how children make sense of the world. Back and forth in the dark the feet of a child patter, until the old priest realizes what he almost forgot long ago. The Lord calls. The boy listens. A message sharp as a knife cuts through the night to Eli, about judgment on his house. By morning, fear and obedience war in a child's chest, and truth wins. From Dan to Beersheba, people learn that a prophet has risen with words that do not drop to the ground. The ark remains at Shiloh. Worship continues, but the ground is about to shake. Philistine pressure builds along the coastal plain. Israel musters at Ebenezer, the Philistines at Aphek. The first clash leaves Israel broken. Elders pull the last lever they can imagine. They bring the ark out of Shiloh, as if the gold lid with its cherubim is a talisman to force heaven's hand. Hophni and Phinehas escort it, faces alight with presumption. The earth trembles with the shout as the ark enters the camp. Across the field, Philistines are sent into dread by Israel's roar, but their resolve hardens. They fight with a fear sharpened into steel. The Israelite line collapses. 30,000 foot soldiers fall. Hophni and Phinehas lie dead among them. The ark of God is taken. A runner reaches Shiloh. Eli, old and heavy, sits by the road straining for news. He hears the report in shattering sequence. Defeat, sons, ark. At the last word he falls backward, breaks his neck, and dies. A laboring woman hears it too, Phinehas's wife, and in her pain she names her child Ichabod. The glory has departed. She says it and breathes her last. Shiloh empties out like a city after an earthquake. The ark goes west. Ashdod receives the ark into the temple of Dagon with the swagger of conquerors. The next morning the idol lies face down before the captured ark. They prop it up, unwilling to see what is plain. The following dawn, Dagon's head and hands lie severed on the threshold like a battlefield trophy. The hand of the Lord presses on Ashdod. Tumors swell. Panic spreads. The 5-city confederacy begins a deadly game of hot stone. Ashdod to Gath to Ekron, each city dragging the ark in and then screaming for it to go. Mice swarm grain stores. Bodies ache. Civic pride turns to civic terror. 7 months tick by. Priests and diviners in Philistia scramble for protocols. They decide on a test no rigged hand can fake. a new cart. 2 milk cows that have never been yoked, their calves penned away. If the cows tow straight toward Israel's border town Beth-Shemesh, the plague is no coincidence. Gold representations of tumors and mice ride with the ark as guilt offerings, the cows low as they go, stepping a straight line to the border, eyes set like flint. In Beth-Shemesh, harvesters drop their sickles and rejoice as the ark rolls in. Then presumption shows its face again. Some men peer into what may not be touched. Judgment falls. The people cry out, searching for a town fit and holy enough to receive what they now fear. Kiriath-Jearim steps forward. The ark rises on the hill in the house of Abinadab, with Eleazar consecrated as its guardian. It will stay there for decades. Shiloh does not see it again. Time moves forward, but the nation is still bent. 20 years pass with the ark in Kiriath-Jearim. Samuel grows into a circuit rider of justice, moving from Bethel to Gilgal, to Mizpah, to Ramah. He does not sit in a palace or wear the diadem of kings. He stands straddling priest, prophet, and judge, summoning a people to give up their Baals and Ashtoreths and return. At Mizpah, water pours before the Lord as a sign of emptying self. Fasting tightens stomachs. Confession strips excuses down to bone. Philistines see the gathering and rush to break it. The people tremble, but they do not run. Samuel offers a burnt offering and cries out. Thunder detonates over Philistine ranks with a force that scrambles order and melts resolve. Israel surges and pursues through Beth. Samuel plants a stone upright between Mizpah and Shen and names it Ebenezer, stone of help. It is not a good luck charm. It is a memory you can touch. Israel settles into a rhythm only faithful leadership can create. There are still wolves on the borders, but the flock learns to hold a line. Samuel ages. His sons, Joel and Abijah, do not walk in his ways. Bribes begin to grease their judgments at Beersheba. Elders feel the pull of a different solution. They gather at Ramah with a proposal that sounds reasonable and fatal. A king, like all the nations. The phrase repeats in every campfire argument and council circle. The world runs on monarchs. Lines of chariots gleam. Taxes build fortresses. A crown projects strength. Samuel does not cheer. He takes the matter to God. A warning is given, and it is thorough. Conscription, forced labor, appropriation of fields and vineyards, the taking of sons to be runners and daughters to be perfumers, the best of everything diverted to the royal storehouse. You will cry out, Samuel says, and the Lord will not answer. The people do not turn. They want the visible prestige of a human throne. The decision stands. Heaven tells Samuel to listen to them and appoint a king. Somewhere in the Benjaminite hills, a tall young man searches for his father's donkeys. His name is Saul, son of Kish, from Gibeah, head and shoulders above any in Israel. It begins at ground level with livestock, which is exactly the shock the story keeps delivering. The servant he travels with knows of a seer in the district. Providence layers itself through lost animals and well-timed encounters. When Saul arrives at Ramah, Samuel is waiting because the Lord already whispered a day ahead. This is the man. Samuel seats Saul in the place of honor and speaks over him what no one in Benjamin dreamt, anointing with oil, a series of confirming signs on the road home, and a quiet word that the Spirit of God will rush upon him and turn him into another man. The signs come like clockwork. The anointing in private gets its public test quickly. Trouble boils across the Jordan. Nahash the Ammonite besieges Jabesh Gilead and offers a treaty that mutilates every right eye and humiliates all Israel. Messengers travel west, and grief breaks into rage. Saul returns from the field behind oxen and hears the details. The Spirit of God surges on him, and he acts with ruthless clarity. He carves the oxen and sends the bloody pieces through Israel with a summons that carries the weight of Samuel's authority. Fear of the Lord falls on the tribes. The army musters at Bezek, the biblical text giving the tally as 300,000 from Israel and 30,000 from Judah. They move by night in 3 divisions. At the morning watch they fall on the Ammonite camp and shred it until the heat of day. Jabesh is saved, and a national celebration rolls into Gilgal. There Saul's kingship is renewed in sacrifices and joy. During the wheat harvest, Samuel gathers the people and delivers a farewell address that slices with honesty. He calls on God for a sign to underscore the gravity of their demand for a king. Thunder and rain burst open the sky in a season that is supposed to stay blue. The shock is visceral. The people tremble between guilt and fear. Samuel lifts their eyes beyond the man they chose to the one who still leads them. Fear the Lord. Serve him. Remember the great things done. The kingdom takes its first official breath under weather that does not follow the calendar. Philistine pressure refuses to let up. Saul selects 3,000 men, a standing force in a nation that never had one. Jonathan, Saul's son, strikes a Philistine garrison at Geba, and the horn blast of retaliation echoes across the hill country. Philistines mass at Michmash with chariots and horsemen and troops like sand on the shore. Israel hides in caves, thickets, rocks, pits, cisterns. A remnant follows Saul, trembling to Gilgal. Samuel had set a 7-day window for sacrifice and counsel. The deadline drains away with fear rising. On the 7th day, with people scattering, Saul offers the burnt offering himself. The smoke has barely lifted when Samuel arrives. The king's first crack shows. The prophet's pronouncement lands hard. Saul's kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought a man according to his own heart. Weapons are scarce. Philistines have cornered the market on metallurgy. Israelite farmers go down to Philistine smiths to sharpen plow points and axes. On the day of battle, only Saul and Jonathan carry swords. The odds sound absurd, which is exactly when courage finds a crack to slip through. Jonathan takes his armor-bearer and slips between 2 rocky crags named Bozez and Seneh. He climbs on hands and knees up toward a Philistine outpost, not with royal fanfare but with resolve that trusts God can deliver by many or by few. The outpost's scorn turns to panic when the 2 men reach the top and strike. 20 fall in a quarter-acre space. Fear swells through the camp like wind catching dry grass. An earthquake shakes the ground. Hebraic humor shows up in the detail. Saul is busy making rash oaths that paralyze his own men, while Jonathan and his armor-bearer crack open the battle by trusting God more than strategy. Confusion spreads. Philistines turn their swords on each other. Hebrews who had defected to the Philistines pivot back. The victory multiplies, despite a curse from Saul that forbids food until evening. Jonathan, not having heard, tastes honey from a forest drip, and his eyes brighten. The king's vow drains strength from everyone else. A lot is cast. The son stands under his father's rash oath. The people rescue Jonathan from execution because they know who actually sparked the victory. Saul wages more wars and establishes his might, but a fault line runs under his rule. It will soon open. Orders come to Saul through Samuel like a line drawn from ancient history. Strike the Amalekites. Devote everything to destruction. This is not opportunism or imperial expansion. It is a long-delayed verdict from Exodus days against a nation that attacked stragglers in a wilderness. Saul musters the army, strikes the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, and then spares the king, Agag, along with the best of the sheep and oxen. He builds a monument to himself at Carmel. Samuel hears the bleating before he even sees the spoils. The confrontation is fierce and exact. Obedience beats sacrifice. That line does not pander to piety. It cuts it. Saul confesses under pressure, but he refuses to enter grief all the way down. He asks Samuel to honor him before the people. Even repentance becomes a stage. Samuel turns to leave, and Saul grabs his robe. The fabric tears, and Samuel seals the symbolism. The kingdom is torn from you, and given to a neighbor better than you. Samuel refuses to leave the Amalekite story unfinished. He brings Agag forward and ends the matter with a sword. The text does not flinch. Judgment sometimes looks like finality. Samuel departs, and he does not see Saul again until the night Samuel is summoned from death. The narrator inserts a line like thunder in a clear sky. The Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Into that wreckage, the Lord whispers a new assignment to Samuel. Risk carries the message. Go to Bethlehem, Jesse's house. Anoint the next king. Samuel fears the political fallout, so a sacrifice becomes cover. The elders of Bethlehem tremble when the prophet arrives, because real authority makes towns shake. Jesse presents sons who look the part. Eliab stands tall, and even Samuel's eyes almost sway. But the line resounds that remaps leadership forever. The Lord looks on the heart. 7 pass by, none selected. The youngest is out in the fields, the one not even invited to the table, because no one could envision his inclusion. He arrives ruddy and with beautiful eyes, the text says, with a concreteness that will come to matter in music and poetry later. Samuel takes the horn of oil and anoints David in the midst of his brothers. The Spirit of the Lord rushes on him from that day forward. At the same time, the Spirit departs from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord torments him. The narrative refuses the modern insistence on clean categories. Power vacated leaves vacuum and torment. Music threads into the story as therapy and warfare. David's skill on the lyre brings him into Saul's court. His music soothes the king. The young man moves in and out of the palace and his father's fields, living in 2 worlds at once. At the front, a giant steps out in bronze and iron. Goliath of Gath, 6 cubits and a span in height, by the Masoretic reckoning, struts the valley of Elah, with chain mail that weighs like a man. 40 days of taunt and boast and paralysis frame his challenge. Lines of Israel's army stop at the ridgeline. Jesse sends David with bread, roasted grain, and 10 cheeses for the commander. David arrives to see the standoff. He hears the defiance. He senses the deep misalignment that freezes armies when they try to fight on enemy terms. The valley is baked yellow. The brook runs thin. David gathers 5 smooth stones and carries a sling that shepherds use to drive off animals. He moves into the valley with more courage than gear, not untrained bravado, but calibrated trust. The Philistine laughs with contempt. The boy runs forward. The sling snaps. The stone sinks into the forehead, and the giant falls face down in the dust. David does not own a sword, so he uses Goliath's to finish the job. Philistines flee as panic rolls them back toward Ekron and Gath. Israel surges forward. Heads and hands appear on walls as ancient sign language, and the songs begin in Israelite streets about the tens of thousands. That lyric becomes a wedge. Saul hears it, and jealousy roots itself in him like a thorn that will not come out. What follows is a spiral of envy and survival that pulls an entire nation into its wake. Spear throws in Saul's court miss David and leave holes in palace walls. The king promises his daughter to David as a trap and miscalculates, binding himself to a son-in-law who carries popular favor. Michal loves David and protects him against the assassins sent by her father. Jonathan, Saul's son, loves David with a covenantal loyalty that shows a different way to be strong. The friendship is not sentimental. It is carved with pledges before God and tested in fields and caves. Saul's heart sours like old wine. He sets hunters on David. The shepherd becomes a fugitive. David runs first to Samuel at Ramah. Prophetic ecstasy breaks like a wave that drowns Saul's pursuers, and even Saul himself strips off his royal garments and lies powerless when he tries to seize David there. Safety does not last. David visits Nob, the priestly town, hungry and unarmed. Ahimelech trembles at the sight of the king's son-in-law alone. Holy bread becomes sustenance in a crisis because mercy outweighs ceremonial protocol when lives hang in the balance. Goliath's sword lies wrapped behind the ephod as if placed there for this exact day. David takes it and moves on. A figure stands in the corner no one should have let stand. Doeg the Edomite, chief of Saul's herdsmen, sees everything. David runs to Gath, to King Achish, because occasionally a Philistine city becomes a refuge when home closes its gates. The courtiers recognize the man who killed their champion. David feigns madness, letting saliva run down his beard and scribbling on gates. Dignity drops if it buys survival. He escapes to the cave of Adullam. That cave fills fast. Everyone in distress, in debt, bitter in soul. The text piles the broken into one sentence, gathers to him, and he becomes captain over about 400 men. David leads a band that no respectable calendar or budget would include. Family joins him. He moves his parents to Moab for safety, because even the anointed must plan logistics. The prophet Gad will not allow the future king to hide among foreign fortresses. Back to Judah, back to risk. Saul hears David is in the forest of Hereth, and he erupts in rants about conspiracies, accusing even his own servants and his son of betrayal. Doeg steps in with the word that costs a city its life. He reports what he saw at Nob. Saul summons the priests and orders their execution when they cannot produce treason. His guards refuse. Doeg does not. He kills 85 priests, wearing the linen ephod, and then turns his sword on the town. Men, women, children, infants, oxen, donkeys, sheep. The catalogue of destruction echoes the sentences Saul spared from the Amalekite king. Abiathar escapes and flees to David, bringing the ephod with him, bringing truth with blood on it. David says he knew it when he saw Doeg. He takes responsibility. He offers himself as protection. Guilt and mercy stand side by side and then go back to work. With Abiathar's ephod, guidance returns to David's choices. He hears that the Philistines are raiding Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. A fugitive rescues a city while a king sits under a tamarisk tree with a spear in hand, venting his grievances. David strikes the Philistines at Keilah and saves the town, only to learn the townspeople will hand him over to Saul if threatened. He escapes again to the wilderness of Ziph. Jonathan finds him in the woods and strengthens his hand in God. They reaffirm their covenant with plain, grounded hope. Saul hunts among cliffs and wadis until news of a Philistine raid draws him away at the last second, and the place is named the Rock of Escape. The geography of Judah holds its breath. In En-Gedi's wild oasis, where desert cliffs drop to green springs, and goat paths wind like scribbles on stone, the chase tightens. Saul enters a cave to relieve himself, unaware that David and his men lie deep in that cavern's darkness. Breath slows. Blades whisper from sheaths in the gloom. David creeps forward and cuts the corner of Saul's robe. His conscience stings even at that measured act. After Saul steps out, David calls from a safe distance and lays out the ledger without an ounce of rebellion in his tone. He had Saul in his hand and spared him. The robe's cut hem tells its own story. Saul weeps and speaks truth that outpaces his heart's capacity to hold it. He recognizes the righteousness that refuses to strike God's anointed. He asks for future mercy on his house. Then he returns to the hunt anyway. The cycle of clarity and relapse repeats. Even fugitives must handle domestic crises. David sends men to Nabal, a wealthy Calebite, whose flocks have grazed under David's de facto protection in the wilderness of Paran. David's request for provisions meets a sneer. Nabal's name, fool, becomes a prophecy he lives out. David straps on a sword and marches to end the insult. Abigail, Nabal's wife, reads the situation with a strategist's mind and a peacemaker's soul. She intercepts David with loaded donkeys, confesses the offense, and steers the future king away from blood guilt. She folds theology into wisdom with such grace that 1,400 years later, readers still feel the power. David receives the gift and the counsel and backs down. Nabal dies 10 days later when his heart fails him after a night of revelry and dread. David asks Abigail to become his wife. She joins him, along with Ahinoam of Jezreel. Saul, meanwhile, gives Michal, David's first wife, to another man, Palti of Laish. Weaponizing marriage as a political tool, the Ziphites betray David again, sending word of his location to Saul on the hill of Hachilah. Saul comes by night with 3,000 chosen men. David and Abishai slip into the camp under cover of sleep sent by God. Saul's spear sticks in the ground by his head. Water jug glints in moonlight. Abishai whispers intentions that align with expedience and tempt justice. David refuses. He takes the spear and the jug and retreats to a hilltop. He cries out to Abner, Saul's general, from a distance, exposing the lapse in the guard. He shows the spear and the jug. He pleads not with flattery, but with convictions too large to fit petty vengeance. Saul relents again, with a mouth that says truths his life keeps undermining. Morning comes. The hunt pauses. It does not end. Exile turns in a strange direction. David goes to Gath again, this time not feigning madness, but requesting a base of operations. King Achish gives him Ziklag. It becomes David's headquarters for 16 months. He raids in the Negev against groups that once raided Israel, Amalekites and others, while allowing Achish to assume he is breaking ties with his own people. He leaves no survivors to carry tales. Achish trusts him. The Philistine lords, however, do not. When they muster at Aphek to move north against Israel, David and his men appear in the rear with Achish's contingent. The Philistine commanders balk at the optics and the risk. They send David back to Ziklag. The future king is spared a battle that would have stained his hands. While David marches back, the northern theater fractures. Saul faces the Philistines on the slopes of the Jezreel Valley. He looks at the array and stands in a silence that feels like exile in his own skin. Dreams do not speak. Urim gives no answer. Prophets are mute. His earlier purges banished mediums and necromancers. Desperation devours conviction. He seeks a medium at Endor by night, disguised in borrowed clothes. The woman fears a trap, because Saul's laws would kill her for her trade. She conjures at his request. The text does not blink. An apparition rises, described in terms that match the old prophet. Samuel speaks, and the verdict that had been brewing since Gilgal breaks open. The kingdom is torn. David is the neighbor. Tomorrow Saul and his sons will be with Samuel in the realm of the dead. The army will fall. The king collapses at those words. Eats at the witch's table at midnight. A king served by a necromancer. In the last hours of his life, the tragic inversion lands with full weight. David, returning to Ziklag with his 600, sees smoke long before he smells it. Amalekites have raided in his absence, burned the city, and taken women and children captive, including David's wives Ahinoam and Abigail. His men weep until strength fails. Stones appear in hands as bitterness looks for a target. David strengthens himself in the Lord and inquires through Abiathar's ephod, "Pursue, you will overtake and rescue." They go. 200 men are too exhausted to cross the Wadi Besor and stay back. 400 push on. An abandoned Egyptian slave, left to die by his Amalekite master 3 days earlier, becomes their guide after food revives him. He leads them to a raiding party drunk on plunder. David and his men strike from twilight until evening the next day. Not one captive is lost. Everyone returns. Wives, sons, daughters, plunder. Generosity marks the aftermath. David sets a statute that those who guarded baggage share in the spoil with those who fought. He sends gifts from the plunder to the elders of Judah, a quiet sowing of loyalty in towns that will matter soon. His leadership looks different from Saul's in the places money and fairness meet. Up north, the Philistines clash with Israel on Mount Gilboa. Arrows find Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. Saul is wounded by archers and refuses the final humiliation of capture and torture. He falls on his own sword. His armor-bearer follows suit. The Philistines sweep the field and find the bodies. They cut off Saul's head, strip his armor, and send the news. His head and gear end up in Philistine temples as trophies. They fasten Saul's body and his sons' bodies to the wall of Beth-shan. Israelite men along the valley flee to caves and fortified cities. A chapter closes with a brutality the text does not romanticize. But honor still lives in corners where no one expected it. The men of Jabesh-Gilead, the very town Saul saved in his first redeemed act, hear what the Philistines have done. They move by night, cross the Jordan, and retrieve the bodies from the wall of Beth-shan. They burn them, then bury the bones under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fast 7 days. Courage returns a fragment of dignity to a fallen king, who could still stir bravery in those he helped. The story slows at this funeral. It lands on the weight of choices and the contours of faithfulness that did not vanish even when the king lost his way. Back at Ziklag, 3 days after the Amalekite raid was reversed, a man arrives with torn clothes and dust on his head. He brings news from the battle. He claims to have found Saul wounded and to have finished him off at the king's request. He brings the crown and the armlet. The details will carry debate because the earlier account already laid out Saul's end. David tears his clothes and all the men with him. They mourn and weep and fast until evening for Saul and for Jonathan and for the people fallen by the sword. David questions the Amalekite about how he dared to stretch out his hand to destroy the Lord's anointed. Then he orders his execution. He will not let opportunism rewrite a narrative or profit from a crown brought by a self-appointed courier. David composes a lament. The song grieving Saul and Jonathan breathes Israel's loss into poetry and memory so that a nation can carry its dead with truth. The mighty have fallen, the refrain pounds without a hint of mockery. Jonathan's love is celebrated in imagery that does not cheapen itself by scandal or misreading. Saul's glory is not erased by his sins. The poetry does the hard work history requires of memory. The book ends not with coronation, but with grief made articulate. The book of 1 Samuel does not fit a straight heroic arc. It begins with a woman whose pain the elite misread, not a general with a battle plan. It places a prophet's calls above a king's edicts. It lets an arc bring victory, while it destroys presumption, and then sits quietly in a hill town for 20 years. It exposes how a sudden storm over ripe wheat can teach a nation faster than 1,000 speeches. It shows a prince starting a battle by climbing on hands and knees, and a future king crying from a cave and backing away from personal vengeance even when it looks reasonable. It narrates a midnight consultation with a medium by the very man who once outlawed her art. It closes with gratitude, shown by people who never forgot the rescue that gave them back their sight. Underneath all these reversals runs a through line harder than iron. God opposes the proud and lifts the humble. He asks for loyalty that weighs more than ritual, and for listening that steadies more than charisma. The book tracks the transfer of power from a fading judge to the first king, and then to the one after God's heart, and at every turn it holds up a mirror. It does not let readers pretend that calling immunizes anyone from failure. It does not let success crown anyone who cannot trust in caves, when their songs echo off rock, and no deliverance is in sight. Samuel never stops being the boy who said yes in the dark. Saul never escapes the spiral that started the moment he chose optics over obedience. David never outruns the hour when innocence slung a stone at armor the world respected, and he never forgets how close the blade was to Saul's sleeping throat. 1 Samuel binds all these threads in a single canvas of a God who shapes nations, not by spectacle but by vows whispered in pain, by thunder out of season, by music that quiets a king's madness, by swords sheathed when pride demands blood, and by a lament that refuses to mock even a fallen figure. The story refuses to let the strong hide behind their armor, or the weak behind their excuses. It keeps paying attention to the heart, and it leaves the scene with simple, searing lines etched in memory. A child promised, an ark returned, a king chosen, a giant fell, a friendship forged, a priesthood cut down, a witch summoned, a mountain named Gilboa, a night of fire, and a quiet burial under a tamarisk tree.